Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week, we are talking all about how to stand up for yourself and speak your truth. Now, being able to speak your mind, share your views and opinions honestly, and tell people exactly what you do and don't want is an incredibly liberating, healthy, and positive way to live your life. But so many people don't do this because they are scared of the emotional consequences. Well, in this teaching, we're going to be sharing some practical tips and advice to help you get super comfortable with standing strong, speaking up, and speaking out. Okay, David, so this reluctance or difficulty to be able to speak our truth, is this an issue you encounter a lot with your clients?
Yes, we talk about this a lot because it's normally emotionally based. So it's clients who are holding things in, very concerned about what other people think about them, very concerned with being proved wrong or failing, very concerned about being criticized. So in this video, we'll be talking so much about the inner child because this is based on the inner child. And we'll also be talking about what we call CCJ. So it might be worth us really going right into what we mean by CCJ. That's criticizing, comparing, and being judgmental.
And so in this context, if we're struggling to be able to speak up, speak our mind, speak our truth, are we CCJing ourselves?
Well, it could be both things, you see. This is why that thing of CCJ is very important, because it could be that we are CCJing ourselves. We tell ourselves one of the three lies: we're not good enough, we can't cope, we're unlovable or unworthy. And so we're very reluctant to say what we really want to say or what we really think. We're more likely to say what we think other people want us to say, because then we think we'll get an agreement with them, because then we're very worried, again, an emotional feeling, about them CCJing us and saying, oh, you're stupid, or you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't know what's going on, or you don't understand. So again, it's almost like you're being driven by your emotions. You're walking a very tight, very narrow tightrope, that whether you're CCJing yourself or CCJing them, or worrying about them CCJing you.
Because I'm wondering, David, whether it's like a series of small self-sacrifices we make here. So most often, I think people deny speaking up, deny themselves from speaking their truth, because they just think, oh, it's easier to just agree with what they're saying. Oh, it's not so important. It's easier just to keep the peace, keep the harmony here. And so we can often convince ourselves that actually it's better if I just keep quiet about this. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the upset this is going to cause.
Well, this teaching is about that, what you just said. It's easier is the voice of the inner child. That's the voice of the part of your mind that we would call the inner child. And normally why you're saying this is because in your childhood, you were embarrassed, criticized, shown up. You were constantly told that you didn't meet the mark, or you were not as good as your siblings or other members of your class or something. There would be some heavily criticized, being judgmental, or being compared with others. So the inner voice will say exactly what you said, Alex. Oh, it's not worth it. Oh, it's easier. Oh, I can't cope with it. Oh, I'm worried about what they think about me. And then it will slip into what we've done teachings on as in the past. Let me people please. Let me try and second guess what they really want. Let me see if I can agree with them. Let me see if I can be part of their gang in the in crowd. Let me see if I can be on their side, not against them. But this is so important not to do, because every time you do that, you take a little piece of your Shen, your spirituality away from you. You take a little bit of who you are away from you. And this is what the inner child has been doing all of your life. Just giving up a little bit at a time, thinking, well, it doesn't really matter. Well, it's not worth the argument. That's another great inner child saying. It's not worth the disagreement. It's not worth the argument. Or here's another one. It's not worth the upset. Have you ever said that? It's not worth the upset. And so every time what you do then is you placate and you just give away and you surrender a little bit more on that journey. And that slowly eats away at your Shen and who you stand for and what's important to you.
So are you saying that the reason we don't speak up is often because we are our inner child is avoiding the consequences? Because people might get angry, they may get upset, they may disrespect me, I'm basically, my inner child is scared of the consequences. The consequences are unknown, but my inner child is kind of assuming the worst. Yes. And I am basically making the choice to compromise myself because I don't want to face the possible negative consequences.
Absolutely. It goes back to what you said. It's easier to compromise myself than to face the consequences. And the biggest consequence that I do when I work with clients on this issue, because such a good question, because this is exactly the type of issue I work with my clients on, is I do not like confrontation. So I do not like confrontation. I do not enjoy conversation. I do not want confrontation. So therefore, the alternative is don't speak up, don't say my truth, don't tell people what I really think, don't disagree with them. Let's please them, let's placate them, let's go along with them, let's be part of their crowd, let's not stand out, let's be invisible, all the things we talk about in our inner child teachings. Let's be quiet, let's shrink down, let's duck down, let's avoid. And so all of those avoidance action and thinking and beliefs, what they're doing, you think they're helping you, and I'm trying to show you and teach you that they're not helping you because they're chipping away at the very fabric of who you are. They're going right down to your roots, to your Shen. And I'm not saying you should stick your chest out and go and be confrontational and argue and to shout and to bawl. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, for instance, if you think you're a sensitive person, I want to teach you how to speak your truth with sensitivity. Being sensitive does not mean you can't speak your truth, but there'll be an overpowering emotion of avoiding that confrontation. It's like the trump card will stop you.
Yeah, because I think for many of our listeners, are very sensitive people, and that's a great quality. The problem is if we buy into the inner child's prediction that things are going to go horribly wrong if we speak our truth, it's almost like we then live the outcome before it happens. Then that creates a lot of red light, uncomfortable, painful emotions within us. Then we are like, oh, I can't speak up. I get confused. I'm going to get upset if I speak up. I'm going to get overwhelmed. And then the whole thing becomes very fuzzy, very unclear, very unpalatable in our mind. And so we avoid it.
And this is why the metaphor or the analogy of the inner child is so powerful, I think, that you have this part of your mind that we're labeling the inner child rather than the ego or rather than the subconscious mind. And this inner child is very powerful, isn't it? It's very strong. And it will also find and perceive and to think about the worst case scenario. And so what it's trying to do as all of the time is to avoid any conflict, anything that anybody can be negative around. If the inner child part of your mind is almost addicted to people liking it and pleasing it, holding it in high esteem, thinking it's wonderful, agreeing with it. It wants to be kind of top of the heap. It doesn't want to stand up and discuss something calmly without losing the temper. And remember the emotional pendulum. Remember the emotional pendulum whenever we're talking about the inner child, because the emotional pendulum is one way, it will not speak up. The other way, it is ready to speak up, but it uses its emotions. It cries, it loses temper, it storms out the room, it slams the door, it sends people to Coventry, it won't speak to somebody that it's upset with.
Yeah.
So,
And either way, you're still not communicating your truth effectively.
that's exactly right, because it gets so frustrated that if it wants to speak the truth, it builds itself up into such a frenzy
Yeah,
that a tiz, yeah, a tiz is a great word. It builds itself up into a tiz, and if they don't accept it in the first instance, it'll throw the papers up in the air and storm out and do a big show, slam the door, not speak to somebody, go into a mood, have a temper tantrum. So here's the emotional pendulum. And when you're always talking about the inner child, what confuses people a lot is this swinging backwards and forwards, and they can't pin it down. So it's all about the basic teaching. The basic teaching is always the same, and it's the most challenging one for you to get right. You are the creator of your emotions. We say it on every video, and every video about hundreds of subjects that people are kind enough to write into us about, ask us to talk about. You see, they always come down to this emotional basis, because for so many people in the world today, they are living, responding to their emotions without accepting and acknowledging that they create the emotion as in the first place. And so all this teaching that we'll be talking about today and the life lesson will come down to understanding your inner child. We have numerous teachings in the archives about the inner child, and it's about understanding that you are the creator of your emotions.
So if we are experiencing kind of anxiety, panic attacks, fear at the prospect of speaking up and speaking out, we are creating those emotions because of what we're thinking and believing about is going to be the outcome of speaking out. So there is that going on, but also with that teaching that we create our emotions do not we're not the victim of them. We also need to teach our inner child that other people create their emotions. So if I speak up and speak my truth, so long as it's delivered in a authentic, correctly worded, well-timed way, in a balanced way, if someone wants to get angry, someone wants to get upset, if someone wants to have an emotional meltdown, that unfortunately is not my responsibility, because they too are creating their emotions.
The question that I would ask a client who said that is, why are you being responsible for their emotions?
Yeah, well, this is what we do because we think we don't want to hurt people, we don't want to offend people.
But that goes back to the inner child. And a lot of my clients, Alex, believe that they were responsible for their parents' emotions or their siblings' emotions. They believe that emotion is something that's driven externally, not internally. And so this just was brought to me by a client just about 2 weeks ago who had to do a speech in front of his colleagues at work, a kind of a departmental speech. It wasn't even a big speech. I think he said there was about 30 people there. And he was so emotionally overwrought with the idea of doing this speech to people he speaks to and works with every day. But he built up this tremendous inner dialogue, negative dialogue within himself, that he's going to stumble, they're going to laugh at him, they're going to plague him, they're going to snigger behind his back after he's done it. He's not going to be able to finish. He mentally drew pictures of himself sweating and his shirt sweating, and it created this worst case scenario just based on, not that he didn't know the subject. He was the head of the department. He knew the subject. He was just delivering, and he was actually, when we got down to it, he he was delivering a message that was to congratulate them because they'd done really well through this pandemic and they'd hit their numbers. And he was just having to say that and congratulate them and give out prizes. But it worked himself up so much that he could hardly explain to me what the situation was. And this is how the inner child works. They're so concerned about what other people are thinking about them, all they may say about them, or what he, when we got down to it and we did the golden thread, you know what his main concern was? What they would say behind his back.
Yeah.
Not what they would say to his
That
face.
he would have no control over.
He would have no control. They'd be talking nothing determines at the water cooler,
Yeah.
talking about him, laughing about him. That was his main concern.
And I guess, David, that for a lot of people, the thing they are struggling with speaking up about is not necessarily just a work thing, like a fairly neutral thing. We're talking about sharing personal stuff about our values, our opinions, our personal boundaries, which would make it 100 times more challenging for the inner child because it's directly about you, the information you're sharing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're hooked into this idea of wanting approval, of people pleasing, of being a good person, of not being criticized or judged in the way that you may have been when you were a child, my goodness, it's for the inner child that seems like a really hard thing to do.
And that's why you can't force the inner child or push them down this road. It is a process and it takes a little bit of time, not a lot of time, but a little bit of time, because you have to delve into the core beliefs that the inner child has. First of all, about emotions. Do they believe that they're creating the emotions? And as you said, do they believe they're responsible for other people's emotions? Secondly, I say a Taoist teaching, which I think is very important. What other people think of me is none of my business. Now, it's very easy to say, and it sounds very smart, but do you really believe that? What other people think of me is none of my business. Now you have to try and teach the inner child that teaching, because we do not control what people think or say about us. We cannot. All we can really do, it's like us doing the video. We get very positive feedback, thank goodness, and thank you for your lovely feedback and questions. It allows us to do more videos. But I'm sure there's people out there that don't like us, that don't agree with us, have a different point of view, that may laugh at us. But we have to do this because this is coming from our truth, from what we believe. So I'm doing this. I can tell you why I do this, because I too came through an extremely dysfunctional childhood. And I do not want your childhood and that inner child part of your mind to define your life. I want you to be in control of your life. I want you to connect to some part of you, not the negative part of you, the scared child who wants to run and to hide and to duck and to dive. I want you to be able to stand to your proper full height, to live in your truth, to be happy to share your truth, to be happy when other people do not disagree with you, not to be able to delve into your emotions and be angry and shout and scream, but to enter into that balanced, harmonious conversation, even if somebody has got a different point of view, to be able to listen to their point of view. And that's the process of moving from the inner child and integrating the inner child as into you. So the inner child is not in control of you. The inner child is not controlling your emotions.
And so, David, this point about what other people think of us is none of our business. Does that also apply, though, in our closest relationships or with our boss? Because surely what my husband or wife or partner thinks of me is important for the relationship to be successful. Surely my boss can't think I'm an idiot. My boss has to think good of me. Otherwise, I'm not going to hold the job down.
So if you listen to the teaching, I didn't say it wasn't important. Yeah. I said it's none of your business.
Okay.
So it's not my business what you think about me as my wife, that's not my business. Because if it becomes my business, now I'm trying to control you. I'm trying to get you to think about me the way that I would like you to think about me. Now, if you think about me negatively, or you've got some important things that you're not happy with, then we address that. That is important. That's very important. The same with a boss. If a boss does not believe that you're doing a good job or have done a project correctly or you're not handling things right, then it's about the project. It's about your work. It's not about what he thinks about you. It's what he thinks about your work. So it's not, I didn't say what other people think about you is not important. I said it's none of your business. You cannot change what other people think about you because they are forming that belief as on their own. But what you can do, and this is why this question is so important, if somebody does think you're negatively or says something negatively, if you are not dependent or codependent on them, then you can address what they're saying from a far more balanced, a far more harmonious place. You are not in this reactive state.
And you're talking about, just to be clear, emotional codependency
Yes,
here.
emotional
So we're not talking about practical codependency, because obviously if you're employed by someone, there is a practical relationship there. If you're married to someone, there is a practical foundation there. So we're talking about emotional. You're not emotionally codependent on their feedback. Yes, acknowledge it's very important to achieve a harmonious relationship, but it shouldn't be at the expense of speaking your truth.
Exactly.
You just need to be honest and be your best.
It can't be at the expense of speaking your truth, because if you disagree with something I'm doing or saying, I should know what it is you disagree with. And we should be able to have that discussion without me storming out, without me having a tiff, without me doing something, crying, shouting, screaming. We should be able to investigate what it is that you disagree with, because you could be right. But on the other hand, you could be wrong. And we should be able to discuss that.
And of course, if you're emotionally codependent,
we can't have that discussion.
You are fearful of the consequences, you're on the emotional back foot. You're trying to defend yourself. You're trying to placate them. You're trying to claw back what you said. You're not able then to have an authentic and potentially very productive discussion.
So I'm going to use a word here that I think is a very powerful word, and a lot of my clients are not fond of this word. It's manipulate. So if you criticize me, if I'm coming from the right position, I can then understand what it is you're unhappy about, explain to you why I've done it, or where I made the mistake, or I didn't make the mistake, or you. We can enter in that discussion. But if I'm so worried about what you're thinking or what you may think, now I'm trying to change your mind. I'm trying to change your point of view. I'm in fact manipulating you. I try and people please you. I try and placate you. I try and make it right for you. I try and do all of those things. We're not dealing with the issue. I'm trying to make it right for you personally. And that's where it goes wrong. Instead of focusing on the issue, I'm focusing on trying to change your emotions or the way you think about me, instead of dealing with the issue.
Okay. So if we're watching this, or we're listening to this teaching, and perhaps it may be the first time that we've kind of mustered up the courage to start speaking up and speaking out, understanding that we need to do the deeper work with our inner child, and we have got many teachings on how to do that deeper work with the inner child, do the reparenting, to break those kind of bonds of emotional codependency. So that's the kind of foundational work to do. But are there any other practical things we can do, maybe the first time we think about facing up to someone who we've been avoiding?
So I say the practical things you have to do first. And we mention this when we're talking about having a relationship with someone else, because this is what we're talking about. having relationships. So I always say the number one thing you have to do before worrying and thinking and fretting about a relationship with somebody else, you have to have a relationship with yourself. So this, what we're talking about today, is you have to do the inner child work. As Alex said, many teachings we have here about the inner child work and the golden thread, because this absolutely stands on what the power your inner child has over you, whether you can bring that relationship together, whether the inner child is controlling you, manipulating you by the emotions. So you have to be able to have that relationship with yourself. And that's why I like the analogy of the inner child, because I want you to think about that part of your mind as a spiritual inner child that's stuck, frightened, scared, locked in a dark room, whatever analogy you want to call it. And you're the spiritual parent, and you've got to reconnect with that child, and you've got to teach it these lessons and come together. Because until you do that, you'll always be treading on eggshells, worrying about what other people are thinking about you, not being able to speak up, not being able to say what you think, because the inner child will be in control, controlling you and always giving you the worst case scenario. If you're a person who's always thinking about the worst case scenario, that's the inner child. If you're a person that's always saying, but, that's the inner child. If you're a person that always are working as a response of your emotions, this is the inner child. All of this that we're talking about is nearly always the inner child, and it nearly always relates to what kind of a childhood and teachings that you received when you were growing up, and how good you are at being able to communicate without relying on your emotions to drive you.
And so in terms of good communication, which is done from a kind of balanced, harmonious position, how would you define that? How would you define authentic communication?
I think one of the most practical ways, and I like to give you practical techniques, is to stop saying I feel. This confuses everyone around you. When you say, I feel really upset, when you say that, it really upsets me, it drives me mad, I can't stand it. And replace I feel with I think, I choose, I believe. And what that does, it makes you actually say, instead of saying, I feel as though you're not understanding me. See, if I said to you, I feel like you don't understand me.
Or you're ignoring me.
I feel like you're ignoring me. But if I say to you, I believe you're ignoring me, now you see how that puts a much firmer footing on it. I believe you're ignoring me. I believe you're not understanding me.
And is that because, David, in order for us to say that with conviction and confidence, it also forces us, by using that rephrasing, it forces us to think about, why is it I believe this?
It is that simple technique.
Rather than it being fuzzy about emotions.
That simple technique clears some of the confusion, some of the fuzziness. Rather than saying, I feel ignored. I feel like you don't love me anymore. I feel like as I'm invisible. I feel like you're not listening to me. Then having to replace that with, I believe you're ignoring me. I believe you're not listening to me. See, and what that does, it makes your statements a lot more firm. As Alex said, it clears out the fuzziness, it clears out the confusion. But before you can say that, you've had to go through a mental kind of process yourself, just inside your own head. And that simple process, just that simple practical change, I call it ban the F word. Ban the F word. When you're doing this work, don't say I feel. Don't say it. I think, I choose, I believe. And what that does, it puts accountability onto you. It makes you think before you speak, and you will then find that you're choosing your words much more carefully, and it's much more open. It's not so fuzzy, not so confusing.
And so if we speak our truth in that way, if we communicate clearly and authentically in that way, and have a rationale for why we believe what we believe, And the other person may not be used to us speaking up like this. It may be a bit of a shock to them, and they may react quite emotionally. What do we then do with ourselves in order to ride the wave of that kind of comeback from them?
Well, that goes back to what we said. That's why you have to do the preparing work, because if somebody then reacts negatively to that, you haven't created that negativity.
You have to understand
you
that.
have to understand that and accept that,
Yeah.
and be able to stay centered, stay balanced, stay in your Wu Wei, hold the space, hold the ground, and allow them time to answer you correctly. And what you're doing there is you're changing the temperature, you're changing the communication, rather than being high up in the sky and ready to explode with emotions. You're bringing it down, grounded much more. But what you'll find is when you've done that a few times, that's why it's very important to do it with yourself first, to do it with the way that you're thinking, the way that you're reacting. Say to yourself, stop saying, I feel really put out here. I believe. And that helps you to take responsibility for yourself. And then when you deliver it to somebody else, you're in a much firmer and much more balanced position to be able to deal with that interaction. Because if you think about it, a relationship, as we say, is all about relating, learning how to relate. But you can't relate if you're just bouncing off each other's emotions. You have to get through that emotion and go down onto what you think, what you believe, what you stand for. And I say in every video, don't I? What do you believe? Why do you believe it? So that work you have to do for yourself first. Don't do it to other people. Do this work for yourself first. Clear your thoughts. Come out of the clouds of your emotion. Steady down and ground yourself into that rock. And then you'll be able to think much clearer. And then you'll be able to deal with people if they get emotional.
And would you say, David, that it becomes a lot easier to do this sort of open, honest communication if we start early in our relationship, whether it's with a work colleague, whether it's with a friend, whether it's with a romantic partner? If we can almost from day one get into the habit of communicating our values, our opinions, our personal boundaries, what we want and what we don't want, then it doesn't it means we're not misleading people in a way. I mean, I don't mean to put that, well, I suppose it is our responsibility, because if we're not communicating honestly from day one, we are in effect misleading people. And then, yes, they will get a shock if, 2 years down the line, you start speaking up and telling them a completely different point of view.
You're absolutely right, Alex. But in the real world, we can't always do that, because we are in relationships, we are in careers, we are in offices. We do have to give talks. We do have to speak to our colleagues. And so the best way I think to do it is start immediately, but start internally.
Yeah.
Start with yourself. Build that relationship with yourself. Try these simple techniques that we've talked about. Think about that thing about stop saying. Just listen to yourself for a day, how many times you say, I feel, I feel, I feel, I feel. And think about it. All you're doing there is describing feelings. That's all you're doing. I feel this, I feel that, I feel this. You're describing a feeling rather than a belief, a thought, something that creates the feeling. So you've got to go down to that thought. Start with yourself, build a relationship. And as Alex says, then for new relationships or new careers or new jobs, you're starting off on the right foot. But as you start to do that with yourself today or tomorrow, then you'll start to experience the difference yourself. And then you'll be surprised how quickly you'll be able to say that to other people and speak much more clearly and much more confidently and be in your center, in your Wu Wei.
And yet there is definitely a kind of positive momentum there. Once we start making these changes, it becomes much easier, more naturally you see more opportunities to do it, you jump on those opportunities, and then it almost becomes enjoyable and very liberating.
But what you'll also see as well, an experience, is when you're talking much clearer, you'll see people reacting differently to you. And that's very powerful. You see that the dynamic, the energy of relationships will change. And rather than you being a victim and running around and people pleasing and worrying about what they're thinking and saying, rather than worrying about what they're thinking and saying, you'll be more interested in what they are thinking and saying, because you can reply to them from a very strong, grounded place. And that then it starts the momentum, as Alex said, and you start to grow and you start to be more assured with yourself and more connected to yourself. And here's another description of Wu Wei: being in your flow again, being able to flourish, reaching your potential. And this starts with that very internal, intimate relationship with yourself and the part of your mind that we call the inner child.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this teaching. I will put links in the show notes to several other teachings that will help you with this topic of speaking up for yourself and speaking out. If you have enjoyed the teaching, please do let us know and perhaps share it with someone else who you think may also benefit. David works with clients all over the world every week by Zoom video call on exactly these sorts of issues. And if you'd like to learn more about David's one-to-one consultations, I will also put in a link in the show notes to those as well. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week, and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.